Today, a weekly podcast exploring the science and culture of the emerging psychedelic field with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. Today on the show, we are doing something a little different. I invited a guest interviewer on to interview me about my experience at Soltara. And that special guest is Hallie Rose from the Thought Room podcast. Hallie and I originally crossed paths a few months ago. She invited me on her show, the Thought Room podcast. And we originally got connected that way, and our paths crossed again at Soltara. She is doing a work trade down there and volunteering her time, and happened to be down there while I was at the retreat. So that was really cool to have our paths cross as another fellow podcaster. And she has a lot of wonderful podcasts that are also interviewing people in this psychedelic space. And so, Hallie and I reconnected. I did a podcast with her down there right after my ceremonies. And I thought it would be fun to kind of keep that spirit of Soltara alive for this kind of decompression integration episode. So this episode is a little vulnerable at times, I'd say, because it is kind of diving into my process and just being really open about, some of the experiences that I went through at Soltara. So I hope you enjoy it. It is a little bit longer than our typical episodes. And again, this is like an integration type of episode, and we do kind of dive deep into what my experience was like at Soltara and just what some of the ceremonies were like. And so if you're interested in understanding or exploring what it is like to be at a retreat center, and maybe you've been hearing about, hey, I kind of want to check these out, this was a great episode to just listen to and kind of learn about what happens down there, and kind of get an idea of what the folks at Soltara are doing. So here's a little bit about Hallie. Hallie is an author, speaker, educator, and coach from New York City. She is the host of the Thought Room podcast and also the founder and CEO of the company Lunar Wild, which aims to reclaim the sacred feminine and address a modern need for a rites of passage into womanhood. You can find Hallie on Instagram. Instagram.com/thoughtroompodcast, or her personal page, Instagram.com/Hallie_Rosebud. You can also reach out to her, thoughtroompodcast@gmail.com, and check out her website, thoughtroompodcast.com. And I highly recommend people to check out the Thought Room podcast. I think I'll have 2 episodes on there. The first one I did, I actually really enjoyed and listened to the whole thing, which I never really listened to my own episodes. But I just really appreciated Hallie's interviewing style and just how she held the space there. And then, just recorded an episode down there. So she's also interviewed some other really great folks. Just recently released an episode with Dennis McKenna, which I really, really enjoyed. So definitely check out her work. She's doing some amazing things, and really like her energy as well. So Hallie has also offered up a coupon for those interested. If you have an interest in exploring plant medicines and, you want to go to a retreat center, definitely check out Soltara. And so this coupon code gives you $200 off a retreat. So that link is bit.ly/Soltara. So that's bit.ly/Soltara, SOLTARA. And I think that might already include the coupon code in it, but if it doesn't, at checkout, you can use the Thought Room, or just Thought Room, not the Thought Room, just Thought Room. And that's the coupon code. So thanks, Hallie, for offering up that coupon code for anybody who is interested in exploring, a plant medicine retreat center. All right, before we get this episode started, I just want to say a huge thanks and a huge shout out to Soltara. Thank you so much for what you're creating down there and what you're offering to those who are interested in exploring plant medicines. So Soltara is a global online community and oceanfront retreat center in the mountainous tropical forests of Costa Rica's Nicoya Peninsula. They work with the Peruvian Shipibo master healers and offer plant medicine ceremonies along with other holistic healing modalities. Soltara's vision is to empower you with tools, knowledge, and space to release what doesn't serve you, affect positive change, and live your truth. So thank you so much, Soltara, for having me down there and to, just inviting me to participate and to also see what you guys are up to. I had an amazing experience and just can't thank you enough. There's so much gratitude in my heart right now for the experience that you've created. For those interested in checking out any type of retreat center, definitely check Soltara out. It felt so professional, very safe. The container was held very nicely, and again, I felt very safe the entire time I was down there. And a beautiful piece of property too, overlooking the bay, water. Had a really nice star deck to chill on after ceremonies. The food was wonderful. Kind of being on a diet can be pretty challenging. No salt, sugars, and stuff like that. But they made the food awesome. I was so excited to eat. Prepping for the experience, I was really struggling with what am I going to eat? How am I going to make this bland food a little flavorful, and man, they did a wonderful job at every meal. So definitely check Soltara out if you're being called to explore plant medicines in a retreat center setting. Again, highly recommend them. I had such a beautiful time there, and yeah, check them out. Soltara.co. That's Soltara.co. And a huge shout out to the participants there that I met and also the team. Just, thank you so much. And this episode is also brought to you by Audible. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. You can go to audibletrial.com/psychedelics today and get started there. It's free, easy, and you can cancel your membership at any time. So there's a lot of great psychedelic audiobooks on there. I'm chewing through a few at the moment, and it's great. If you listen to podcasts, you'll love audiobooks. So check that out. A free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. That's audibletrial.com/psychedelics today. And again, if you like what we're doing here at Psychedelics Today, different ways to support the show. You could please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And if you're feeling called to it, leave a review, iTunes, Facebook, and share a post. If you really like what we're doing here, one of the best ways to help us out is just spread the message, share a post, from Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, retweet something. Just send it out there. If you like one of these podcasts, share it with a friend, colleague, and help spread that psychedelic message. It really helps us and also helps to get this information out there as well, right? We're trying to make some changes and change the psychedelic narrative. So the more that we can spread this info, hopefully it also changes the cultural narrative around these substances and medicines. And if you're feeling called to it, another way to support the show, Patreon. So patreon.com/psychedelics today. So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope you enjoy this episode with Hallie Rose and me integrating my experience at Soltara. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Psychedelics Today. So I just got back from Soltara, a week-long retreat, and we are doing something a little different today. I recently just recorded a podcast with Hallie Rose from the Thought Room podcast while I was at Soltara, kind of debriefing my experience there. So when that one drops, you should definitely check it out. I think I was a little bit more in the medicine space chatting about my experience, so it might be a little bit different than today as I've had a few days to kind of sit and simmer with the experience experience. So I'm excited to have you on the show, Hallie. It's been really fun getting to know you over the past few years and even just sitting down and having you interview me for your show. So I thought this would be fun. You know, you've been volunteering down at Soltara for a few months, and I think you're kind of wrapping up your volunteer stuff at the end of the month here in January. And yeah, you were there for the last few days, especially after the fourth and final ceremony for me. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to have you on here, share a little bit about your experience, and then we'll flip it around and I'll have you kind of ask me some questions and, you know, debrief this week-long retreat that I was just at. So welcome to the show. And how do you want to kick things off? Do you want to do a little bit of an intro on who you are and what you do?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, Kyle. It's such a pleasure to be on your show because, you know, now we've done 2 recordings together. We did our first recording when we met up in New York. I think this was over the summer, and you shared some of your journey and your near-death experience and how that's kind of shaped you to step into the work that you're doing. And then, as you mentioned, I got to interview you the day after the culmination of your first 4 experiences with ayahuasca, which for me was just an absolute honor, and to see the ways in which, and I'm sure we'll dive into this, but how you kind of came full circle with some of the things from way back from your near-death experience, and getting to witness that and blossom into also a friendship with you has just been such a gift. So thanks again for inviting me on today.
Yeah, it's been really awesome getting to know you. Yeah, do you want to share a little bit about the Thought Room and how that got started, and what are your plans with it? What are you doing with the Thought Room podcast?
Yeah, sure. So the Thought Room was actually inspired by my first medicine experiences here at Soltara as well. I came myself as a guest in May of 2019. I had very little psychedelic experience. I was more into meditation and yoga and other practices like that, and I had a lot of fear around doing this medicine. I still had some, I guess, lingering feelings of growing up. I really pushed away anything psychedelic or drug-like in nature. Even, you know, alcohol wasn't really my thing. And so I think I had a lot of fear just stepping into the unknown of this. And I think it is that way for a lot of people. So when I came to Soltara as a guest, I had a pretty transformative experience. And a lot of the paradigms I had been operating with just flipped themselves on their head. And this is not a unique experience to me, but I think a lot of people, when they work with ayahuasca in a more traditional context like this, they can have really big breakthroughs and changes in career path or sudden insights about relationships. And for me, I had a really funny experience where in ceremony, I kept looping back to this thought, and the thought was just podcast, podcast, podcast. And this was so, it just seemed ludicrous to me because I had heard stories, of course. Everyone hears stories about ayahuasca and seeing visions of nature and animals, and you try not to have expectation, but I definitely had expectation of what sort of messages would come through, and maybe these profound insights about like my relationship with Mother Earth and all of this stuff, which, you know, came later as I worked with the medicine more and more. But when I came this time, it was just this one ceremony was just the word podcast, looping, and a couple of other things. But I was just like, okay, something's wrong here. This must be my ego just wanting me to start a podcast. And I just kind of pushed it away. And then 2 ceremonies later, I was having a bunch of other insights about family dynamics and a couple other things with career. And I was asking some questions in the medicine space. And then again, this thought just interjected itself. It said podcast, podcast. And so I just made note of it and went home, started integrating my experience and started thinking more and going through the notes that I had made during my week here. And I was just ruminating on it. I was like, podcast, what is this podcast thing about? But something in me was lit up. Something in me was excited. And I had done a couple of podcasts. I had been on podcasts before as a guest, just people interviewing me about my work with my startup company, Lunar Wild. And so I was like, yeah, I kind of know what this space is about. I'm down to do it. And I didn't think I was going to make it into a full-time thing. It was just intending to be a hobby. And I still had a little bit of resistance because I felt like many of us feel, which is I just had a ton of work on my plate and there was no way I was ever going to find time to create this new thing. But I just trusted and I just took the first step in starting it. And I made this, I want to say, contract to the universe. And I basically agreed to do this. I said, yeah, I'll start a podcast, but it's got to be fun. Because I've done enough work in my life that was really hard, and I had to fight for it and wrestle with it and suffer within it. And I just made this contract. I said, I'm done suffering, and I will do this, but you've got to make the guests come to me. And then the next thing was deciding on a name.
Yeah.
And I thought, what on earth am I going to name this thing? I don't even know what my content is yet. But from the very beginning, the seed of an idea felt like it had a life of its own. And when I was going back through my integration notes from Soltara, I had written down some of the most poignant things that had happened to me in ceremony. And I had this one experience, which I believe I've shared with you before, but I'll just share briefly for the people listening for the first time to this story, which is I had an experience one evening of being in an infinite void, just kind of like I describe it as a black cosmic sandbox where there was just nothing. It was shapeless, colorless. It was like echoing into an empty chamber, just nothing. And then all of a sudden, the only thing that I had awareness of within the space was the thoughts crossing the threshold of my mind. So not only that, but the moment a thought left my awareness, or I heard the thought said in my own voice, like that voice in your head, it started to characterize itself in this cosmic sandbox through color. So it was like, I describe it like taking a little dropper of food coloring when you drop it into water and you kind of watch it melt and splash out. That's what watching my thoughts was like. So this thought would occur and then it would kind of melt into this Crayola world around me, and it had a very particular essence. Whatever the thought was, it had its own like flavor, so to speak. And I went through this sort of fun house of being inside of my own thoughts, like I was in a little room. So I had positive thoughts and I had these warm feelings, these bright feelings, these rainbow rooms. And then I got lonely and I had thoughts about being scared and being lonely. And suddenly the rooms shrank and I felt tight. I felt constricted. I lost all the color and they became dull and monochromatic. And this was the very first time in such a clear way I could see how our thoughts and feelings were in relationship to each other, and in a very real way, choosing or curating or being aware of the thoughts that cross the threshold of our mind, how that can quite tangibly shape your life experience. So in this notebook, I had just written the words, thought rooms. Remember the thought rooms. Yeah. So that's
amazing.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. So that's the story behind the name and the journey of starting this podcast. And one thing led to another. And Soltara extended this invitation for me to come down here and actually record the stories of guests and teachers, influencers that were coming through and share their medicine stories across the board. So it's been such a gift, and I've been absolutely humbled to be able to help. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so you're kind of doing this podcast in conjunction with Soltara in a sense. Like, and I remember, I think when we chatted, you said you weren't really trying to start a psychedelic podcast per se, but it's kind of morphed into that now that you've been at Soltara and you're having people come through. I mean, you just released an episode with Dennis McKenna, or you are releasing an episode with Dennis McKenna soon.
Yep.
So you have like a lot of awesome guests on there, and yeah. It's cool. What's it been like to be at Soltara?
Well, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, first of all, the facilities here are top notch. It's like living at a luxury retreat center, because that's essentially what it is. And the grounds here are just beautiful. The weather is incredible. You know, as we record this, it's 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of winter. And so I can't complain about that. And then on top of it, it's been really neat getting to be a part of the team here and get to know the staff and really get to see the operations and what goes into creating and upholding the integrity of a medicine center. So that's given me just brand new respect for this work, how much energy it takes to help people have safe and well-integrated experiences. And I've just heard so many stories and seen so many things, met so many people coming through, that if there was ever a question in my mind before about the power of this medicine, it's not a question anymore. I've seen so much healing. So it's profound.
Yeah, it's probably amazing to have that opportunity to hang out there for a bit. And I mean, what drew me to Soltara was looking at their website and noticing who is on their advisory board, Dr. Biela Bate and Dr. Clancy, I forget her last name, but she's part of Chacruna too. I'm sorry if you're listening, spacing on your last name. And then Dennis McKenna is on the advisory board. And, you know, I've just had so many people that have been in the psychedelic scene, I guess you would say, go down to Soltara and just have amazing things to say. And that was the one thing I noticed that really stuck out to me. Like when I first got off, well, no, even when they picked me up in the lobby, like just the warmth from the staff members, the greeting, and then getting off the bus, like on the grounds, and you know the facilitators are there greeting us right off the bus, and just so happy to meet everybody, and then just going right into like the intro talks. Like I was just really like kind of blown away by, you know, the safety guidelines that they were providing. Some of it reminded me of our lineage with holotropic breathwork, kind of like this non-directive approach. Really, everybody is there to have their experience and, you know, really try to stick with your own experience. Don't try to interject your experience with somebody else's experience. If you are coming here with training and energy work and stuff like that, really try to refrain from using that throughout the week on other people. You are here for yourself and to focus on yourself. And I mean, that just, we talk a lot about that in breathwork and this really non-directive approach. And it was just right off the bat, that intro lecture that they gave, I just was like, wow, like I feel so safe here already by just the ground rules that they are laying down for us. And it felt really special. Like I just felt so contained right away. And as a lot of retreat centers are popping up, I think it's sometimes a little like, you know, I think we have to do a lot of vetting. I mean, in our courses and in our education, we're always really kind of preaching vetting retreat centers and, you know, vetting shamans and people that you're working with. And I mean, I felt so safe the entire time I was there. So it definitely is a very, very special place. And I did not want to leave. So yeah, it seems it's so magical there, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that I think you would agree with me on this one, where if anyone is considering something like this, it's important to do your research and really choose somewhere that resonates with you. It's good to go based off your friends' recommendations or things you hear, but ultimately, I think it's important to really rely and trust on your intuition, to find the place that's right for you. And Soltara for me was a right choice because although I had a desire to go down to Peru and work with the medicine, where it comes from natively, I had a lot of fear. And I think that coming to a place like Costa Rica and staying at a retreat center that felt more contained and perhaps a little bit more westernized was a stepping stone for me. It was something I needed to do. And I understand some people are very much traditionalist and they think, should only go do the medicine where it's native from. And I think that's definitely the right move for some people. But when it comes to your work, your own medicine work, your own path of personal development, only the individual knows what's right for them. And ultimately, you have to rely on that internal compass.
Totally. Thanks for pointing that out. And I guess, what was your internal compass? What drew you to Soltara? What was, the check that said, I'm going to go there versus going to the jungle?
Well, for one, I'm a part of a mastermind program that's called Fit for Service, and it's through Aubrey Marcus. I don't know if you're familiar with Aubrey Marcus, the podcaster. So I joined in January of 2019. I joined this incredible group. Essentially, it's like a mindful business collective, but to me, it became so much more than that. And I've met most of my friends, and a lot of my guests are from this collective. And one of the people that I met or was introduced to was Dan Cleland, who's one of the co-owners of Soltara. So I first heard about Soltara because he brought it up and introduced what he was creating here to our entire collective and basically extended an invitation for us to come down. And I had been thinking about it. My brother had done ayahuasca, but I had a lot of...
All right, there's a little bit of technical difficulties. I guess the one downside of trying to record virtually while you being in Costa Rica is the Wi-Fi can be a little spotty down there. So you were explaining that you originally, you're part of Fit for Service, and that's something that Aubrey Marcus has put together. And for those that don't know who Aubrey Marcus is, he's a podcaster and is also the owner, right? Founder of On It, which is a supplement company, and they do a lot of they have some really great supplements and exercise equipment and stuff like that. So that is the last thing I heard.
Okay, yeah. So I was basically just sharing that I was introduced to Soltara through Dan Cleland, who belongs to the Fit for Service mastermind with me that you're referring to, that Aubrey Marcus puts on. So back in April, I was in Austin, Texas, and Dan invited everyone from our group to check out Soltara and what he was building here. And I started to follow Dan on Instagram, and I think it was just a few weeks before I came down, actually, that there was a post about the Dennis McKenna retreat. And I had a lot of fear surrounding ayahuasca, but the idea of coming to experience that with someone as well seasoned in this space as Dennis McKenna, it brought me some peace. And there were only 2 spots left. I remember it was 2 spots left in female-only housing for this Dennis McKenna retreat. And for some reason, it just felt like one of those spots was meant for me. And after that, it happened very quickly. I think I was here 10 days later, flight booked, retreat paid for, everything. And so that it was one of those, it was one of those meant to be sort of moments for me. But back to your question of why did Soltara feel like the right thing for me? I think it really was that I had a lot of fear around this experience, and I was looking for somewhere that I was going to feel safe, and especially traveling alone as a young woman, I've had some fear around that. I've had some negative experience around that before. And they really do, they pick you up from the airport. They take you from the airport directly to the ferry. On the ferry, they take you all the way to the center, and they sort of hold your hand through this entire process, because I think that they know how incredibly vulnerable and scary it is to even take the first steps toward your own healing, especially towards something as unknown and unpredictable as ayahuasca can often be.
Yeah. It's really amazing. Like a lot of people in our group just kind of pointed out like how much like they were doing a lot of hand holding, but even just like the little subtleties that they've kind of built into their retreats and the way that they operate to make you feel so safe. I mean, it is pretty amazing how much like effort they put in there and how much thought they've put into the organizing everything. And I guess what blows me away too is like they've only been operating for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
And so they're fairly new, but I mean, I feel like they have created such a great operation so far. Like I was pretty blown away, honestly, about like how well contained it was, how much it flowed, and even the downtime that was built in there. That's so important. We're staying up really late during the ceremony nights, and we're also kind of fasting. I think somebody did some math. It's like, we're going like 19 hours without food because we have lunch and then we kind of fast before the ceremony, so we're not eating dinner a few nights a week, most of the whole week, and just all the downtime they built in there, and yeah, they just done like a really great job.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes it easy to participate in something when you believe it has so much integrity, and so that's why it's been easy for me to sit here and interview the people that come through and help tell their stories about how wonderful this place is, because, I see it every day, and I know Dan and Melissa, the owners, personally, and I see Scott, the director, and how much he pours into upholding the integrity of this place and coordinating the healers that come directly from Peru, because it is so important to them to maintain the traditional roots, the Shipibo roots of this medicine, and have traditional Shipibo healers here. So you're completely correct. All those details, that attention to detail is really great. And I think it was this interview that I did with Dorian Yates while he was here, and he talked about what he loved about Soltara was that, yes, they had the traditional Shipibo aspects to the ceremony, but they marry it in this way with what is needed for those of us coming from a Western world. So it's great to go down and do the medicine traditionally, and I think I will at some point, and I think if people can and they feel that that's the choice for them to do that. But for some, this having an experience here in Costa Rica might be a better fit for them. And coming from a Western world, we have different needs, going back into it rather. So if we were if we were all native Peruvians and we were drinking the medicine there and then going back to our communities and villages there, we would have different needs than if we're going back to New York City or Chicago or wherever you're from, rural USA. There's different pressures and needs upon us. So I think what Soltara does so well is their integration program and the thoughtfulness that they put into, say, like the Hero's Journal that they give everybody. Those things are really aimed at specifically for Westerners who are going through this experience.
Yeah, you make some really great points there. And, I was talking to the facilitators who have done, years down in Peru and the difference between what they're doing there in Costa Rica versus going to a retreat in Peru. And yeah, just the level of comfort and safety. I think, a lot of people in the group that I was part of, it was their first time. And like, I sometimes have group anxiety, especially when digging into these realms. Like I'm more of like, I'd rather just have one person there, or just, the weirdness of experiences can get pretty strange in groups, but I never felt that at all. Like, it just felt so safe and contained, and I really appreciated that. And yeah, some of the facilitators said the jungle in Peru isn't for everybody, even though if you're interested in working with ayahuasca, it's really great to be able to go down to the origins where it grows naturally and really to have that experience in the jungle where it's growing. It's a much different experience in a sense. At least that's what some of them were saying. But yeah, just the comfort and like the safety that was happening at Soltara in Costa Rica. For a first timer, like I was definitely having a lot of anxiety of like, oh man, what do I expect? And I was just really, really surprised when I got there. Like all that stuff kind of faded away. So, and to see a lot of these other first timers, like not have a lot of anxiety and whatnot, I was really kind of like blown away by that too. It just seems like they really held the container and made everybody feel so safe to go into this work. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to chew on. I've been thinking about this for the past few days since I got back. And so, I mean, I'm just so blessed to be able to have that experience and come down and check out what they're doing down there. So yeah, very, very blessed to have that experience.
Yeah. So on that note, maybe let's dive into your experience and how it's been for you, even just if you want to start with how it's been for you getting back the last few days and how you're starting to feel, what you're noticing. And if you want to talk a little bit about your ceremonies, that would be really neat too.
Yeah, well, let's jump into the ceremonies and we'll get to the integration towards the end. So we start off Monday morning with what's called vomitivo. I got there, we got there Sunday afternoon, got oriented. They gave a little intro and safety talk about what to expect, what the week was going to look like. And then we had dinner. We just got to bond with the group. And then early Monday morning, before breakfast, we did what was called a vomitivo. It was lemongrass tea mixed with, quote unquote, some secret herbs. I'm not too sure what else was in there. Maybe there was some mapacho or some purgative herbs within the tea. Tasted wonderful, actually. Everybody was like kind of scared to drink it at first because, it was like, oh, what is this what is this going to taste like? But it was a really sweet, nice kind of lemongrass tea. And, the idea is, you drink a lot of this stuff to kind of override your system where your body naturally wants to purge it out. So I think I drank about like 5 cups, big cups of this tea. And, it is kind of a funny little ritual. We're all kind of cheering each other on and and just to get used to the purging aspect, because ayahuasca can make people purge and vomit that way, but also to clear the system out energetically and also physically to prepare for the ceremonies. And a funny little side note, as I was coming into San Jose, everybody was like kind of sick around me on the airplane. And as we started to descend into the airport, there was a little kid sitting next to me. He was probably like 4 or 5. And he just starts puking all over the place. Like, luckily it was in a bag, but I'm sitting by the window and he is just vomiting and just like shaking. And at first, I get a whiff of the vomit. I thought I was going to puke then. And then I just started to laugh and said, I guess this is Aya kind of preparing me for the week. The journey is beginning with this little poor kid puking next to me. And I'm sure I'm going to be around a lot of people purging that way throughout the week. And so it was a really interesting way to kind of start the trip off. And then going into the vomitivo on Monday morning. But, it sounds kind of intense to make yourself like kind of purge like that. But it was actually really awesome. You're just kind of throwing up a lot of liquids, so it's kind of, easier on the system. And I actually felt like much lighter afterwards, and it was just like a nice way to enter into that ceremonial space. And then then so Monday night we had our first ceremony, and I love that Soltara built in these pre-ceremony sessions, where we had yoga and, you know, a nice meditation to really start off the ceremonies. So I just love that they built in those pre-ceremony meditation and yoga sessions. And so the first night was kind of like a diagnostic dose night, just seeing how you respond to the medicine. And you know, I was a little nervous of like, you know, hearing all these stories of all this vomiting and purging on coming out of both ends from people. And, you know, I really tried to not listen to a lot, but I'm definitely guilty of also trying to prepare myself for it. And I listened to Eric Gotze's The Myths That Make Us podcast, and Kyle Kingsbury was interviewing him about his experience at Soltara. So I kind of got a little rundown before coming there of like what to kind of expect, which was nice. So I kind of knew about what the Vomitiva was before going down there from hearing Eric talk about it. And that was a really great episode. So Eric, if you're listening, awesome job. So yeah, that first diagnostic night, I drank about a half a cup, and you know, everybody talks about how bad tasting ayahuasca is. I'll have to admit that the only time it ever tasted bad to me, I mean, it's a bitter tasting drink, right? It's bitter tasting. It's not the most pleasant thing to drink, but I actually found it a little bit enjoyable. Not like, oh, I constantly want to drink this stuff, but like I put it in my mouth and I held it in my mouth for a little bit just to kind of taste all the notes of, you know, the flavors of the medicine, which, you know, everybody else seems like they kind of just like throw it back. But I was curious, right? Like I really wanted to know what the medicine tasted like. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of cacao in a sense, which I think having my mind view it as cacao has totally ruined chocolate for me now, unfortunately. I bought some chocolate on the way back with, it was like 70% chocolate with some cacao nibs, and I opened it up on the plane and took a bite of it, and I immediately just tasted ayahuasca within this chocolate bar, and I was like, damn it, like I think I've just completely ruined raw chocolate for me, because it tasted, you know, it's a very earthy flavor. It is bitter. Like when you have raw cacao, it's that earthy, bitter flavor. When I drank raw cacao, it's very sludgy, because we're drinking about like an ounce and a half of it, and it's very thick and sludgy. So I think that's maybe why ayahuasca kind of reminded me of that. And that's my experience, right? I think everybody kind of approaches the taste a little bit differently. So that first diagnostic night, like, you know, as it was coming up, there was that factor of, oh man, here it comes. I can't believe I signed up for this. And, you know, I think that's like that normal healthy anxiety. I always think about psychedelic trips as like this trip to space. And I can only imagine what it's like to be an astronaut to blast off into space every time. There is probably that like, oh shit type of like feeling of like, here we go. Like we have no clue what to expect, but we're going on this mission. So that started coming up, but then once I started to enter into that space, it slowly started to pass, which felt really nice. And then all of a sudden, it became really familiar. It wasn't intense. It was just a nice light feeling, but there are these images. I had my eyes closed, and it seemed all green a little bit behind my eyes. And there's this image of a serpent kind of weaving in and out of like my DNA and my body. And there's just this feeling of healing. And I could feel this serpent kind of just flow through my DNA and throughout every cell in my body. And it was like, you know, kind of weaving parts of myself back together again. And, you know, I really just kind of sat in that, and it was a really beautiful experience, and it felt so healing. And, I guess I do for many of the listeners, I do kind of come from more of a shamanic background with studying shamanism in my undergrad and doing some of that stuff and, studying herbalism and working with the spirits of plants. So to me, it was like, the spirit of the plant was coming out. I started to develop a little bit of a relationship with it and really try to understand, like, who are you and what are you trying to show me? So that first ceremony was, pretty quote unquote mild, I guess you would say. There was a little bit of anxiety. I did feel like a little nauseous. I didn't do any purging besides like maybe like a little crying, a little emotion would come up. But then that image of this serpent kind of just like stitching parts of my story back together, it just felt so nice in a sense of like, wow, like there is something intelligent here working on very subtle levels. So yeah, that first ceremony was a really nice kind of intro to the medicine.
And I'm thinking about in particular, and I alluded to this in the beginning, of a moment you had shared about your near-death experience and how you were able to re-experience that event, I want to say in a new way, but perhaps it's just with more clarity or a different lens of perception in relation to kind of the emotional experience of it in a way that you had not yet seen it or perhaps forgotten. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to do like a little segue there. So there's a few things I want to say before I get there. Mm-hmm. So this experience that you are bringing up was my fourth ceremony. And so the next two ceremonies for me, again, they were pretty gentle in a sense. They were, I just kept having this image of the plant singing to me, and there is some emotional catharsis here and there, some crying, going through family dynamics and going through like different memories of things in my life. But in the background, there is always like this serpent kind of like weaving parts of my narrative and being back together. And during the second ceremony, I was expecting something big because I took a full cup, and it was kind of coming up, and the spirit of ayahuasca, I was just like, I thought this was going to be more intense. I said that. I was like, wow, I thought from hearing everybody's story about this, I thought this was going to be really intense. And the spirit was like, oh, you thought that this was going to be easy, right? So you thought like you were just going to drink me and I was just going to show you this world. It doesn't work like that. We need to understand like where each other are coming from, and we need to develop a relationship first. And, you really kind of have to get to know me a little bit before I show you this other world. I thought that was so interesting. And every night I kept thinking like, well, maybe I just should take a booster dose, because you're allowed to have a booster dose if you're not feeling much. And the next two nights after that the diagnostic dose, I was like, yeah, maybe I'll take a booster dose. But then every time I thought about it, the medicine was like, well, get to know me on this level first before you do that. And so, it was really interesting to have this relationship with the medicine and work with it on these different levels. And, I brought this up to one of the facilitators, and I said, it's been really interesting with this medicine. Like, I haven't purged at all. I didn't have any of the puking or diarrhea or whatnot. While other people around me, a lot of people were purging all sorts of different ways. I had mostly emotional purging through tears and crying and shaking. And, I was thinking back to some of my early psilocybin experiences and just realizing like how intense those were. And I thought like, wow, I've definitely had more intense experiences with mushrooms when I first started diving into this stuff. And so I told one of the facilitators that, and I think it was Erica. I think she said, mushrooms are interesting because there's like this big door. Like you can take it and you just enter into this world. Like it's there. With ayahuasca, there's a smaller doorway to kind of penetrate through. And I was thinking about that. I was like, well, that's really interesting because, that kind of resonates with that experience with me having a dialogue with the medicine saying like, what's going on here? And it's saying, oh, you thought this was going to be easy. Like you would just drink me and I'd just show you everything. No, it's about the relationship. So when she said that, I was like, well, that makes a little bit more sense, right? Like, I think I might need to develop a relationship with that. And so that fourth and final night, I went into it thinking about this. And so our fourth ceremony is what's called the Arcana ceremony. It's kind of like this closing ceremony and adding protection for you for going out into the world. And I had no idea, like when I booked this trip, that I booked this trip on the week of the full moon and lunar eclipse. So it was a full moon in Cancer, and then it was a lunar eclipse that was happening. So on Friday, it was the full moon plus the lunar eclipse that happened a little bit earlier in the day. And I mean, it was already intense energy from that astrological perspective. And then there were some other transits happening. And I know for some of you listening, astrology isn't your thing. It sounds a little woo-woo, but there was also these transits with Saturn and Pluto, which are super intense at times. And so going into that ceremony, like I was a little nervous. So I was like, oh man, this energy is really intense already. I'm going to take 3/4 of a cup. This is supposed to be kind of like a closing ceremony. And, I don't know if I really want to get blasted off. It's Friday night. I gotta we just have Saturday and, maybe I don't want to go all in before we end here. I probably should have went all in the beginning of the week so then I had more time to have downtime and integrate. So I started off with 3/4 of a cup, and Maestro Sui and Maestra Sylvia were singing their Icaros around, and then so they start off singing in the middle, and then after they're done singing in the middle, they come around and sing to you individually, and that's when you're allowed to ask for a second dose. So, by that time, I think it was about like an hour and a half. I think I drank that cup on that final night around like 8:15. I think they got done singing around like 9:30-ish, 9:45-ish. And so I just turned on my light, and I had this message where, nothing was happening. Like I felt sober, and I was just like restless on my mat. I was like, well, like maybe this should just be like a nice night to have this Arcana ceremony, kind of close it off. I don't need to go that big. This might just be a really nice way. But there was something like agitated in me. It's like, but I'm here and maybe I should take full advantage of it. And the medicine was like, now is the time to ask for a second dose. Like you need to ask for help, and you asking for help is asking for another dose. So I turned on my light, and I only asked for 1/4 of a cup. So, I had equivalent to a full cup. And so I had a half a cup the first night, and then full cups the rest of the night. And so this is really interesting. When we're talking about dosing with psychedelics, it's like sometimes this stuff is not dose dependent. You have no idea what the hell you're going to get. And I really come back to it's almost like what the psyche is ready to process. And so the facilitator came back over. I said, hey, like, can I just get like 1/4 of a cup? And he came back and just said, enjoy it. And I was like, oh God, I think maybe I made the wrong decision. So that 1/4 of a cup really, really set things off for me. It really blasted me off. And, the maestros came around and sang their Icaros to me. And then after, Sylvia left, I laid down, and that's when things really started to take off for me. And it started with, I think I like asked, my intention that night was kind of calling upon the moon and asking for this illumination for a path forward and what am I doing, and just trying to get some guidance with some stuff. And then all of a sudden, once the medicine really started to hit me, I saw myself back in the CAT scan machine. And for those of you who've listened to the show, you probably heard this story a bunch of times. For those who haven't listened, maybe you're just tuning in for the first time. I had a near-death experience when I was 16. I ended up rupturing my spleen. And so I had, emergency surgery. And the doctor said if I came in 5 or 10 minutes later, I would have been dead on arrival. I lost that much blood internally. So, I've done so much processing around this experience. And every time I tell it, I always tell it in a way where it's blissful and beautiful. And, I tell it in the way of I was going back home to the stars, and I felt like I, just really okay with what was happening to me. But this time was so different. And I always think I'm done processing that near-death experience and the psycho-spiritual aspects of it. And, I've been processing this stuff for 16 years. What new could come up? So I saw myself back in the CAT scan machine, and I was terrified. It was I was back in there as a 16-year-old child, and I started to shake during the ceremony. And I felt all this fear that I had down in my root chakra, the pelvic area. And I was so terrified. I said, oh my God, I'm dying, and I have so much trauma to my body right now. This is so scary. And, when I have always thought about this, whenever I was in the CAT scan machine, I had so much bliss because I was just losing so much consciousness. And, this orb of light came over me and told me I was going back home. And, this was just going to be a quick transition. So it was really interesting to revisit this traumatic experience in a different way and process the fear, because I feel like I've just crammed some of that fear so far down into that root chakra for survival in a sense. And it's I had such a hard time kind of tapping into it and being I was so afraid. Even though I had all this euphoria and all this ecstasy, as I was slipping away, there was so much fear that was going on inside of me. And then so I started to shake, and I just let my body shake way down into the pelvic area. I could feel all this tightness, and I just let my body convulse, and I started shivering. And I caught myself breathing as I was shivering during the ceremony. And I was maybe I'm being too loud. Maybe I should slow it down. And I felt like I was just back in that. And I had this image of seeing an animal curled up and slowly starting to die, and realize how traumatic that is and how profound that is. And so I was correlating that to me, I'm the animal slowly dying, and I'm just sitting there shaking and shivering, which I was shivering a whole lot when I was in the CAT scan machine because I didn't have any blood in me and I was so cold. And I probably was reacting that state. I was shaking and shivering while I was drifting away. I was just so damn cold while I was laying there. And so, I was revisiting this, or not even revisiting, I was re-experiencing the fear in a totally new way during this ceremony. And then I started to go into my body even deeper, around the scar tissue in my abdomen, and I started to stretch that and let that shake, and I could feel it just let go of all this tension that I've been holding in that area. And I don't know if I mentioned this when we were recording, but when you have your abdomen just sliced open, I have a scar from my diaphragm pretty much down to my pelvic bone. I had to learn to walk again. I pretty much had to learn to use all those muscles again. And I was so afraid to use some of those muscles because I was so afraid I was going to tear open my stomach again. Because I looked down, have all these staples in there. I think I had 64 staples or something in my stomach. And I was afraid to use the core. I was so afraid to use those muscles because I thought like I would rip that open again, or it wasn't healing up quick enough. And so my body has like kind of remembered that trauma, and the sense of normalcy is always this sense of tension, and it's kind of like gotten used to operating in a certain way because of that trauma. And so I really started to examine how trauma is held in the body, especially after surgeries, like with people that have scar tissue and have been through like really significant like physical trauma, how that physical trauma is still so like in the body, in our movements, the way we move, the way we hold ourselves, the way we carry ourselves. And so I really started to dig really deep kind of in the fascia, like the emotional muscles in our body that store all that emotional content. And, you know, it was just so profound to go so deep into my body in a somatic way. I mean, you know, I have this somatic background and I have tons of experience with breath work and the body work aspect. And so, you know, this is something I'm familiar with, but this ceremony helped me kind of view it in such a different way and to explore it in a new way. And it was just so amazing to process the fear in my body, the fear of dying. Because as I said, I've always kind of correlated it with like this blissful, loving experience. And not to say that the ceremony was scary. So, you know, I continued to focus on my breath. And, you know, from the Groff framework, when we talk about breath work and psychedelic experiences, there's this concept of double bookkeeping. I knew I was in Costa Rica. I knew I was on the mat. I knew that, you know, I just drank ayahuasca, but then feeling that I can explore this without so much fear. So allowing my body to process the fear, but not essentially attach to the fear and become fearful. And so, you know, it was really interesting to dig deep in that way where like I'm re-experiencing this thing, but I'm also not attaching to it because like I'm somewhat aware that, okay, I did this thing. I'm going to let my body express what it needs to express, and to really fully surrender into that and feel safe with the body expressing itself. Because I think with trauma, like when you do feel safe, it is really hard to feel safe when you've been traumatized. Like from a somatic point of view, sometimes, you know, everybody's like, oh, do yoga or do meditation. Like yoga and feelings of relaxation can really trigger that fight or flight response, because like that just means like you're not on guard, and feeling safe means that you could be threatened at any moment. So for your survival, you need to be on guard. So I started to bring that into it and said, you know, what would it feel like to actually relax into these feelings instead of trying to like fight it? And I mean, it really just blew me open in so many different ways. I mean, it's so hard to put into words at times. And, you know, that experience slowly started to subside with a near-death experience. And, you know, just in regards to like my path and stuff like that, it really kind of opened me up to like, you know, wanting to work more with people that have been through stuff like this. Because just kind of going through my own process and realizing like how much I've just been holding on to certain aspects, even though I've done tons and tons and tons of work around it, you know, like it's just still in there at times. And that's what blows my mind. It's like, you know, we could do so much work on things, but we can always, you know, when we go into these spaces, develop new meanings around it and, you know, new experiences around it, and dig a little bit deeper, like peeling the onion layers back a little bit more to get more clarity about what is actually going on here. So that was really that was a really profound experience. And as that started to settle, you know, the ceremony came to an end, and I heard these crickets outside, and it was as if they were singing to all of us in the Maloka, and it was just so beautiful. Like I could feel the plants like working on all like on a cellular level, and just like really taking in the medicine and let it kind of heal me in a really unique way, right? Because I think I mentioned like during the sharing when you weren't there, like I'm just so used to like big cathartic experiences. I want to go really hard with things. And so this round, I'm like, what would it be like to just relax into the experience and let the medicine do its job? And it was such a different way for me to approach this work. And yeah, it was it was really profound on a lot of different levels.
Wow. Kyle, that's such a beautiful story. I mean, all of it is, it's incredibly inspiring, and something you just said about relaxing into the experience. This is, I think, such a cornerstone of not only navigating within the psychedelic space, but the experience of life itself. Because what I'm learning, the more that I work with this particular medicine, it's that I don't need to make anything happen. I don't need to make anything happen. I just have to allow it to happen. Even the experience of, for example, self-love. Like, people talk about, cultivating self-care and cultivating self-love. Well, yes, it can seem like it's an action, but the truth is it's already all right there. We've talked about this, you and I, before. It's all right there. It's really that we just need to allow it and kind of relax our reins on the control around how things are supposed to look. Yeah.
And that feeling of relaxing into things is scary because we're giving up control, right? And I think like when you're going into that sense of like ego dissolution and things are dissolving, relaxation could mean like a safety thing of, if I totally let go, like, who am I? What will I become? Maybe I'll become nothing. Maybe I'll die. And that's like a really scary thing. But if you can like surrender to it, I mean, it can really open up to some really, really beautiful things. I mean, I think a lot about like past psychedelic experiences and this experience. If I was fighting with it and saying, I don't want to visit this, like, I don't want to think about this stuff, this is too scary, then you kind of get into these like negative thought loops. It gets scary. This is when the difficult emotions can come up. But to really, and this is really, I think, the importance of the set and setting and how safe I felt there, where I could just completely kind of let go of everything and go into that, because I knew I was surrounded by really great people that were looking after me, that like if something did happen, somebody would be there right away. So it was really trusting the process and trusting my body to express what it wanted to express in that moment. But it's a practice. It's a lot harder said than done. There's a lot.
Yeah. What's so interesting is we're talking about set and setting again, and I was just, right before we started recording this, I was just putting the finishing touches on the episode with Dennis McKenna that you were referring to, that we're actually releasing on Monday. So that'll be January 20th. But he talks about set and setting and dosage. And then he says, you know what the most important part is? In my opinion, he says, it's the set, because the set is you. The set is you. That's your mindset. It's you. And this is kind of, in my perception, what you're talking about is like, you need to choose somewhere where you can get your own head in the space that you can trust and you can allow. And it's okay if you don't, because you're going to have the experience anyway. And it's going to be the perfect experience for, each one of us. But it does make it a little less painful if you can surround yourself with the optimal conditions to be in a place of trusting and allowing that if the going gets tough, you're safe still.
You're safe. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, set is super important. And, to be honest, like I was a little nervous going down to Soltara just because of like, I guess where I have been at, like emotionally and mentally for the past few years of like wrapping up grad school, working on psychedelics today, and just pumping out so much, and moving back home to work on both of these, school and this project, and just feeling like somewhat depleted. And so there's a sense of me of like, whoa, like what's gonna happen when I go down there? Like, is it gonna blow out? Is this gonna be too much for my nervous system? Because where I'm at, and I always find myself in these situations where I'm questioning, this isn't the right time, but when is the right time ever, right? And every time like I've gone into these very healing experiences, they've always kind of been during times where I'm like, I need a reset. And I definitely got what I needed at the retreat, and it was totally different from what my expectations were. There's definitely a little fear and anxiety, and I think that's a little hard to admit, like having this platform, like people were really surprised that it was my first time with Aya. And I mean, the truth is that, it's called to me for over 10 plus years. And I've had opportunities to sit in, ceremonies like that are not in traditional lineages, just people kind of hosting stuff. And every time like I would get an invite, I always got this message to, the message was like, wait till you're a little bit older. The messages that I have to bring to you, you won't understand until you're older. So just wait. And every time I tried to force those invites to make that happen, it just wouldn't work out. And so this opportunity kind of just fell into my lap in a sense. And I'm just so grateful for the team at Soltara and Melissa for having me down there. Waiting too can be so important. And I think we want the healing right now, but I think from my experiences in the past, it's also important to sit with stuff in life and, really kind of wait till you really feel called to it. I didn't rush this process. I've waited over 10 years for it. And some people are like, whoa, that's kind of crazy. I thought you would already have had an experience with ayahuasca. Most of my stuff was early on when I was doing early explorations after my teenage years and during my undergrad. And then a lot of breath work and stuff like that. But yeah, Aya always kind of said a little bit later. And that was tough to sit with. I'm like, I want it now. I feel called to do it now. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that I waited for this time. Yeah, it's been interesting. So I think that's important about the set, right? It's also listen to your intuition when it comes to this type of work.
Yeah, I'm glad you're saying this because again, you hear so many glowing reviews about people's healing experiences, and that's because there are so many. However, it really is not for everyone. There are some people that probably likely should never try it or don't need to try it. And you really have to, because it is such a powerful medicine. And I like to hear stories of people like yourself that waited a long time and made sure it was right. Because in a way, it's like, I'm going to use the analogy of getting into a marriage. Just because you decide to get married doesn't mean the marriage is going to work out well or it's going to last, because you have to have the tools before you go into the marriage, before you start that relationship, so to speak, of, okay, when things get rocky, how am I going to learn to communicate and navigate within this relationship? Well, ayahuasca is the same. It's like when things get difficult, either during ceremony or, before the whole process, as you're preparing, as you're doing dieta, or afterward, as you're trying to maintain dieta, as you're trying to integrate. If you don't have some of the tools and the skill sets that need to be cultivated beforehand, you're going to just have a much more difficult time and perhaps unnecessarily. There's no reason to really be doing that to oneself. And it can actually be quite detrimental. So I feel like we can't emphasize enough how important making a decision of this magnitude is.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, and I'm thinking if I approached this when I was a little younger, I probably wouldn't have done the dieta. I probably wouldn't have prepared as much as I prepared for. We always say integration and the process really begins as soon as you make that conscious decision. And, for a month or two leading up to it, I was having ups and downs and different emotions. My dreams were heightened. I was kind of all over the place. I was tracking my dreams, paying attention to what was triggering me. I was sitting with a lot of those feelings. And knowing that it was all part of the process. And, I think if I accepted that call to drink Aya, I think I was 22 or 23. I don't think I probably would have done all that. And the people that were hosting probably weren't going to tell me to do anything about a dieta because it was more kind of gringo type of ceremony. And, Yeah, and the doing the dieta was also kind of like this discipline thing of like, changing my food habits and really trying to cut things out. And then even that, like sticking with the emotions as you start cutting foods out and dealing with like caffeine withdrawal. And so like, the prep itself is also really challenging. And, but, I think and trying to do this during the holiday was so hard. I had to be like, I can't have this. Everybody's like offering me sweets, and my dad cooked like this really nice prime rib. I was like, oh my God. Like and I'm like sitting there with like rice and like mild curried lentils eating. And I'm like, with like no salt or flavor to it at all, So that was challenging. But I think like giving yourself time to really prepare for an experience can be also really rewarding in the long run. You kind of are taking those sacrifices. You're working with the emotional content beforehand. Like, I felt like I was already doing a lot of emotional purging before I even got there. Trying to take in my own advice of what we teach of like, okay, like this stuff's going to come up. And luckily, like, I just have a lot of friends that are willing to listen and hold space for me. But, it's so helpful to like find somebody to work with as you go into this, because you don't even realize like, you're getting triggered throughout the weeks or whatnot, and just thinking like, oh, I'm just in a bad mood. But also being aware that like, no, this stuff is part of the process, and it's coming up for a reason. And how can you create a container for you to either sit with that, explore it, because, it could probably also come up during your ceremony too. And so it's nice to go into that already well prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the preparation part it's so important in... how do I want to word this? I guess some people are a little bit turned off by the idea of doing anything that's like disciplined, so to speak. Like, oh, I'm not going to, why do I need to do that? Rules and all that. But I think that they're missing the point. And I think that these experiences can be so much deeper when there's a sense of we're giving something up. We're honoring this medicine. And a lot of indigenous traditions, things like fasting are common practice, and it's not to punish ourselves. I think that's a misbelief. I think from my understanding, what's really occurring when you're going on something like dieta or fasting for different, like in Native American culture, the vision quest and things like that, there's a whole other side of us that opens up when we cut out some of the things that numb us or ground us. So we open up to almost like our subtler energy bodies. And so we think we're, like you said, just in a bad mood. But truly what might be occurring is that you are just more heightened in sensitivity. So the very same things occurring, you're just not numbing yourself. You're not blasting through your day with the caffeine. So when the tired or the anxiety and whatever it is comes up, you're not eating sugary foods or salt or all of these things that have become so ubiquitous that we might not even be aware that we've been using it as a tool all this time. So for me, that's really what the dieta does. It's like strips away the layers for myself of the illusions and the truth kind of comes out in an often, but not always, uncomfortable way.
Totally. Yeah, that's very well put. It's been interesting too, like reintroducing foods right after that, and like being like, wow, like I didn't realize like how much salt people actually put on their food.
Right.
Like I had a burrito when I got back to San Jose, and I was just like, oh my God, I felt food drunk. I was like, wow, like it's so heavy. And I really actually appreciated part of the dieta, and it just made like the simple things in life, like appreciating a lot of the simple things in life a little bit more of like, wow. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Really, I mean, what a way to live life, right? Isn't that somewhat the goal, is to just be able to drop into a space of really just appreciating the most simple and beautiful things for what they are?
Totally. And I think like that's kind of what psychedelics always teach me is like we make such a big deal about things at times, and like really some of it is just so simple, and like we just have to get out of our own way at times and just like appreciate everything that's like kind of in front of us. But it's also really hard to do, right? We're human. We get caught up in our emotions. We get caught up in the day to day. We get caught up in this physical reality, and it's really hard, right? But I think like part of this process of wanting to explore this medicine is like reconnecting with parts of ourselves that we've lost touch with, and trying to just remember who we are a little bit, which reminds me a story that I heard from Kat Harrison at the MAPS conference. When was that? 2013. She was describing how ayahuasca like came into being in a sense. I forget which tribe this folklore came from, and there's so many different ways that, you know, people discovered ayahuasca. But if I remember this story correctly, it was a white dove flew down from the Andes and came down to the jungle and taught the shaman of this tribe how to combine these plants, and it would be medicine to help remember the people, remember who they are because they've lost their way. And that's always kind of stuck with me of like, oh yes, all this stuff is here in front of us all the time. We've kind of lost our way at times. And what was also really interesting during these ceremonies was kind of evaluating and like reflecting on my relationship with psychedelics and stuff like that, and just how they've changed over the years. And yeah, it's been really interesting to kind of explore that. And I think I mentioned this when we were recording this type of little vision quest I did during my undergrad. I was doing like a shamanic 1 week kind of training thing for during my school. It was like during the summer, and we went camping, and our teachers, my teacher just had us go out in the woods for like 4 hours by ourselves and just be with nature and do stuff like that. And one of the questions that I had back then was like, why use plant medicines? Like, why are these things even available? And, you know, this little download or message that I got was like, you know, it's like we're this spider on this web, and nature tears holes in our web all the time, and the web is our narrative in our life, and we've gotten so far away from the center of our web of who we are because of all these holes that are torn in. And some of us suffer like great amnesia of not knowing who we are, and psychedelics can help us remember that we're even on the web, so that we can go back and spin our life back together again, to weave our narrative back together again. Because if you don't even know you're on the web, you don't even know you're the spider on the web, how do you go back and do the work and heal yourself? And so, you know, I thought that was like a really interesting analogy that came through me, and thinking about it now, I'm like, oh man, that also really highlights integration work, right? It shows us where these holes are and says, hey, this is what you have forgotten about, or this is what you need to work on. And at least just pointing the way, saying, hey, here's this hole in your web. Now you can go work on it. And so, you know, it was always like, we don't need plant medicines. I mean, sometimes the amnesia is just so damn big that, you know, maybe we need that, right? Like we need something that just says, hey, this is where it's at. But, yeah, it's just this remembering of who we are. So that's what like a big takeaway from the retreat was just like this kind of remembering of like, oh yes. Because even like when I was in the space, I said, man, this all feels so familiar. I feel like I've been with this medicine so many times before. I feel like I know it in certain ways. And who knows, maybe that's naive to say, because I only had these 4 experiences. And as you probably drink, it gets weirder and weirder. But but yeah, and probably more intense over times and whatnot. But I don't know. There's just like a sense of familiarity. And I think like whenever I go into those tryptamine worlds, there's a sense of familiarity with it all. And, you know, maybe it is... you know, I always correlate it to that near-death experience and whatnot. So, you know, I really have no clue what's going on in these worlds or these realms, but it's endlessly fascinating, to say the least.
I love what you just said about remembering who we are. And it got me thinking about some of my own experiences and how it feels like the plant medicines are wonderful tools for illuminating those blind spots.
Yeah.
And it's not that our friendships or relationships, family don't do that too, because they do. But sometimes we get a little bit too defensive, right? Like we feel threatened when people are pointing out our things, to the point that we build other warped stories around them, blaming the other person for their not seeing of us or the way that they're bending the situation. And we talk ourselves out of the truth that's really trying to be reflected to us. At least this has been my own personal experience. So what plant medicine has done is it allows me to see the truth or hear the truth about some of these, to use your vernacular, these holes in my web of my personality in a way that is undisputable. I can't argue with it because I'm seeing it with such clarity, and there's not really another human being in front of me standing that I have all these complex dynamics with. It's me telling me what the issues are. So I think that's for me what kind of makes this so powerful. And I loved the story that you shared, and it reminded me of a story that one of the facilitators, Todd, here at Soltara, shared during a group share, and it was a Hopi creation story. And I'll do my best to retell it. It's a short little story, but basically the great creator said, I have a gift for the human beings, but I need to hide it somewhere until they're ready to find it. And it is the gift of the knowing that they can create anything. They are powerful beyond measure. They can create their own reality. And the creator asked the earth, where should I hide it? And the eagle said, give it to me. I'll fly it to the moon and they'll never find it there. And the creator said, no, one day they will build things and they will fly to the moon and they will find it there. And so the fish said, give it to me. I'll swim it to the bottom of the ocean, deep into the depths, and I'll hide it there and they'll never find it. And creator said, no, one day they too will find the bottom of the ocean. And so the buffalo said, give it to me and I will run it deep into the plains. I will bring it to a place on Mother Earth's crust that man has never walked. And the creator said they will find it there too. So lastly, great-grandmother who lives at the breast of the earth, deep inside the earth's bosom, said, put it inside of them. And creator said, it is done.
Wow. That just kind of gave me shivers listening to that. That's a really beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And, as you were telling that and just this idea of creating, that's kind of how the end of my fourth ceremony ended. Oh, man, just thinking back about that night. So the ceremony ended and I was just started taking off. I was like, oh, God, what am I going to do for the rest of the night? Everybody's going to bed and I'm just, this thing's really starting to take off. But, when I was up on the star deck, thankfully some people hung around and I was able to process and that was a whole experience in itself, thinking about some really, really deep things. But that was one thing of wow. And, this was something that came, this has already been inside of me because it's something I thought about well after I had my accident. It was a lot of this stuff is just so simple. We're here and we can kind of create whatever we want to do, but it takes a little bit of looking inward to really kind of understand that. So I love that story because that's just how I felt of why do I do some of this stuff and why am I so interested in, holotropic states of consciousness and going inside. It's to find different parts of ourselves and remember that like we're here and the magic is here on this physical world. I mean, you get to wake up every day and really appreciate, obviously there's a lot of hard days. I wake up with hard days. A lot of the time, but even just to embrace that and realize that like we have the ability to kind of create things, and what limits us with that is the boxes that we create, and sometimes the institutions, right? So the boxes that the institutions create, and we have like a lot of self-doubt of like, oh, I could never do that, or oh, I can't do that because like X, Y, and Z, or there's like gatekeepers for this and I can't do that because and it's like, we're all like trying our best, and we can do these things, right? But it just takes a little bit of like reassurance to be like, we're all here, right? Like it reminds me of like this thing that one of my teachers said, and this is kind of like a harsh reality to face. I was talking about worthiness, right? Because I think sometimes we all get caught up like, are we worthy to do this, whatever that is? And he just said, you're not worthy. None of us are. And I started like really feeling that. I was like, wow, that's a really dick thing to say. But I sat with it, and what he was saying and what he meant by that is that we're all so blessed to be alive and just to be here on the planet that like none of us are better than anybody else. None of us are worthy in the sense of like, I'm better than you. Like I'm worthy to do this because I'm better than you. We're all human, right? And like, we're all here. We're all worthy of the same things in a sense. And at the end of the day too, like Mother Nature can consume us all. And, to think that humans are controlling the show. And I'm sure, maybe Dennis McKenna, his famous line, and maybe he talked about this in your episode. It's like the plants are always saying, you monkeys think you're running the show,
yes.
Right? Like you think you're worthy enough for understanding how this works. We're in control. Mother Nature, this bigger organism that it's like we're a microbiome, right? Like we're a super organism. We have tons of like organisms on us. And, sometimes I just feel like that's what humans are. We're just this organism within a bigger organism. And we have a role. I don't know what that is. I think that's the philosophical question. What are we doing here? But, yeah, we're all worthy, right? We're all worthy of being here.
Yeah. Wow. That is well said, my friend. I think it's I can tell that you feel it, and I feel it too. But I also am recalling times in my life where I didn't feel that, and where someone's saying even that we have a responsibility to how we feel. I remember times in my life where I felt really triggered by that. And I was like, well, that's a privilege for people to say. They clearly don't know how hard my life is or whatever it is. To say that we're in charge of the way we're perceiving things just feels like a luxury. So I don't know if you have any insight on this, but for me, plant medicine played a big role in changing that sort of my victim mentality and my attachment to suffering. But do you have any suggestions for people who maybe are listening to this and going like, I don't feel that sense of oneness. I feel like life is really, shit kicking me right now, and I don't want to be there, but I don't know how to get out of it, how to change my paradigm, how to change my perception.
Oh man, yeah, that, as much as I talk about this and, with psychedelics and my near-death experience, like, to be honest, like I definitely fall into those holes at times, and it is hard to get out of that. Like I've definitely been throughout, the year. I mean, I think even just like going to grad school and just like with all this change, like I definitely fell into some pretty deep holes where I'm like, I'm not worthy of anything. And so, in a sense, like, yeah, now we're getting into like this conversation of privilege and healing and stuff like that, right? Like this experience with ayahuasca kind of like helped me remember that, right? It's always been inside of me. I always remembered, but life we build up all these walls and we kind of push everything away at times because we have to survive. And to be able to engage in some of this work obviously comes with a little bit of privilege, like going away to a retreat costs money, to fly somewhere costs money, to engage in some of these experiential wellness workshops costs money, travel, and not everybody has access to that. And, going through grad school and being broke and living at home and also creating this project, there's times when I just wanted to go do some self-care and I'm like, crap, I can't even afford to do that, right? And I think that's kind of why I fell into those little holes of I really just want to better myself. But, oh man, I'm also in this position where, I don't know, I'm doing a million things and maybe my priorities aren't straight. I probably could have done those things if maybe I set some things, if I maybe had some priorities a little bit set for, maybe getting a part-time job while I go to grad school instead of working on this project. But I also really enjoyed working on this project and wanted to give it my all while I was in grad school too. But yeah, it's a tricky thing. And, if you are going through that right now, I always think that there's hope and that you're worth it, right? We get so many emails of people asking where can I get psychedelics or where can I, find a guide? And it really is really, really difficult from the legal standpoint to say it's really hard to say I can't help you and here are the legal options, and most of the legal options include getting out of the country, and most people can't do that. So, I don't know the right answer. And I think, this is kind of the shadow side of the wellness field, that we are all worthy of having experiences like this. It is almost like our human birthright, in a sense, to understand who we are and to develop a relationship with the universe. And that was something that I came back from after my near-death experience of going, we are all worthy of all of it. And why are people suffering when they don't have to be suffering? It's because of these, institutions and different kind of societal structures that we've created for ourselves and boxed ourselves in with. And I don't know the right answer around it. And I think these are things that we have to work on and we have to address, even as this psychedelic movement moves forward. Who is this therapy going to be for? Is it just going to be for the rich and elite and the people that can afford these therapies? And I always think about the people that are really struggling, that really, really, really need it. And it's just it's very exclusive at times. And even if it's not exclusive, right? Things are always happening in the underground. Mushrooms, you could easily grow your own, but then you're putting yourself at risk with the law. Maybe you live, you're a person of color and you feel you can't speak out about your experiences, or you feel very fearful of engaging in this stuff because of, what has happened historically. It's just so complex, and I think we need a more humane way of moving forward with this field. And this is a lot of stuff I was thinking about while I was down there during the ceremony of how are we moving forward with this? How can we offer these experiences to people that really, really need it? I was even, going into Costa Rica and going through some of the the impoverished areas and being wow, could this medicine be available to them? They're not going to be able to pay for a retreat center. And sometimes these are the people that really need it. And I'm coming back to something a therapist said to my friend, and they said, this friend was just saying I haven't had time to really process my trauma about this thing. And the therapist was therapy is a privilege. And do you think the people in Nepal, this happened when that huge earthquake happened, do you think the people in Nepal have the time and privilege to sit there and process what happened? No, they're in survival mode. And there are a lot of people in survival mode that don't have the privilege of even going to therapy, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be psychedelics, but it's just basic things having access to therapy and healthcare and stuff like this. And we've kind of made it in this system where you need to be somewhat privileged to access this stuff. And, I really think to like peer support, I think some peer support movements is somewhat of a way forward in this, of saying like, we need people, like we're social beings. And I think there's a huge benefit to peer support at times, where it's like, here's people getting together to help to process whatever they need to process. It's kind of going back to that old thing of like sitting around the fire and just doing storytelling. But yeah, I mean, these are big issues, and I think a lot of people struggle with it, right? Because it really does come back to privilege and access, and we really, really need to figure out a new system forward with having I'm going to even just say, not even plant medicine, it's just therapy and healthcare. We need more access to help. There's so many people that could benefit from just seeing a therapist, seeing a coach, just seeing a professional that can help them with different aspects of their life, but they just don't have they can't afford it or whatever. So, and that also came up during the Horizon event. Somebody asked like George Goldsmith, who is the founder of Compass Pathways, who's trying to patent psilocybin. It's like they brought this up too. They're like, people that are struggling can't even get access to mental health care. So like, and you're trying to make this depression pill. Who can afford it? If the people that really need it can't even afford simple healthcare and mental health care, how the hell are they going to afford psychedelic medicine therapy? So it's a really, really tricky thing. And I think it's the shadow side of the wellness field in general. Like, I think the way of moving forward with this and also giving hope is just like encouraging people to go out there and get loud about it, and I don't know, break outside the box a little bit too, like, I don't know. It's tough. It's really tough. I was just having a conversation about it with somebody else, even about like the therapy world, like in the therapy and social work world, there's always this conversation about privilege and like, how is our privilege showing up as a therapist and and it's like, well, let's even reflect on becoming a therapist and how much privilege that takes and how much gatekeeping the field actually is. Well, I need to take out loans and I need to go to school, and that means like, taking all this sacrifice, and then I need to do this and do that. And it's like, I think there's great healers out there that have never became healers because they couldn't afford to do it. And so when I hear some people in the field say, oh, well, I did it, you just do it, and this is the way forward to work within this field, you need to become this therapist and you need to have this, and therapists and clinicians only own the rights to provide this medicine. It's like, just because you did it, I mean, I think you should really examine your privilege as a person like going through this, and even just the institution and how much privilege they're even kind of like gatekeeping with it. So I don't know, it's complex, but I think even when you're in the depths of it, and I've definitely been in the depths of it, like, life is worth living. When I was very kind of like, and I've probably talked about this on the podcast, but after I came back from that near-death experience, like, I experienced a lot of suicidal ideation because I just like wanting to escape and kind of go back to that bliss. And it took me a very, very long time to call Earth like my home. And like, even though I still have like bad days, there's some days where I just wake up and go, whoa, I am here. And that's all I really need. Even though like my day sucks some days and I'm not in like the best position, just to wake up and be part of this, I think that is just magical in itself. And if everybody could just wake up and maybe realize that like the magic is here in front of us, and like it is just such a gift to be here and to wake up and to be alive, like how could that shift consciousness instead of like waking up being like, I don't want to be here, this sucks, I want to escape it, and be like, whoa, I get to wake up in this world where you can kind of create your own life in a sense, if you can really kind of break down some walls. And we have no idea what the hell life is. And this was a thing that came up during that last ceremony. Somebody was talking about childbirth. And so I was like really deep in these like existential thoughts of like, what is it? So I asked the questions like, who are you before you were born? That old Zen saying. And then what is it actually like to wake up as a baby into this world? What is it like to wake up into this world? I mean, even just thinking about the process of being born into this world. Most of us never asked to be born into this world, right? Maybe we had a choice from that spiritual sense. It's like, oh, I chose this life, I chose this body. But like, we're here. And that in itself just blows my fucking mind. That we're just born here and like we're waking up in this world, and it is just, it's unbelievable. Like every time I go spend time out in nature, I go, I never want this to end. This is so beautiful. Like just watching life unfold. I mean, even on the crappiest days, I just try to go outside and I just like stare at a sunset, or I watch like, an animal do its thing, or I just watch the wind blow the leaves, and I go, this is a miracle that we're just here. I mean, I don't even know how to put that into words, like how much it just like blows my mind that like we are here.
Well, and you're so good about that. I always see on your social media you getting out into nature and all of that. And it's like this world is kind of like one big theme park when you can look at it that way. Like every leaf, every stone, every animal, every person brings a new adventure. It brings something that you haven't known before, or at least not in this exact way, in this exact moment. And I think it was Emerson who said, what would we do if the stars only came out once every 1,000 years? No one would sleep that night.
Man.
Yeah. He said no one would sleep that night. Instead, the stars come out every night and we watch television.
Oh man. Yeah.
It's like, it's all right there. It's the magic. The stars are there, and we just don't see it. That is the most epic blind spot of being a human being, is being asleep to the magic that's right in front of us.
That's so true. I always say, if you want to spark some wonder and curiosity, if you live in a city, get out of the city for a bit, go out to the country and look up. Like, just look up and ponder and just think about like, what the hell else is out there and why are we here? I mean, that in itself, and just noticing like, and okay, some of this stuff would be like, oh, this is like just some psychedelic thoughts. I mean, these are thoughts I had after my near-death experience. So most of this stuff isn't even psychedelic related. Every time I've been into those psychedelic spaces, it's just a remembering of what I experienced during my near-death experience, and going like, no, this is what I came back with after like I almost died that one night, of being like, oh my God. And so these are thoughts and like ideas that I've been struggling with for a while, and probably why I've been in heavy existential crisis here and there, and have found my way to psychedelics, because it helps me kind of like spark that memory back, or remember some of that experience, to be like, oh yeah, like this is the magic. So yeah, I encourage you to just like, how could you slow down? However you can do that. I always think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, I get it. We're in survival mode. It's hard to slow down, and it's hard to do self-development when you're in survival mode. Like, that's not even on your list of things to do when you're just trying to like pay bills, you're working multiple jobs and just trying to get through everything. But like, where could you find a moment just to slow down and take in the beauty and magic of the world? And sometimes that's even like, watching people, right? Like, I just love sitting in a subway or like sitting out in public somewhere and just watching people, just loving the interactions that people are having and just like appreciating the humanness that we all have, right? Like we're all doing something, and like how could you just develop like a meditation throughout the day to just like notice what's going on around you and to just appreciate, whether that's the humanness, the beauty of nature, whatever that is.
I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like I could keep going, and I love chatting with you. And I don't know, it's kind of funny. Somebody did mention like they wished that we had some longer episodes. So we are going on about like an hour and 45 minutes. And I guess I didn't even touch on integration, but I guess this whole conversation has been integration related. But I'm wondering, a question for you, like, what have you been learning at Soltara? Like, what are some like big takeaways that you've been there for the past few months? And I don't know, any big takeaways from just being there? Or, I'm sure you see a lot of people come in and make huge changes. I mean, that's got to be really cool just to watch each group come in and make changes. Like, it was just funny. When we got back to the hotel, we saw the new group already in the hotel, and, we just kept looking at each other and being like, man, some of these people might be their first time and they have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And just like noticing the change, like, somebody said to me, like, after the week was over, we were sitting in the pool at the hot tub, and they said, I haven't heard you laugh all week like this. And that hit me. I said, oh my God, you're right. Because I've been like kind of all tense and on edge and processing stuff. And it's like, wow, I finally was able to like let go at the end of the week after that big final ceremony to laugh a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, let's see, I've been here nearly 3 months now. So I just had my 12th experience with ayahuasca this Tuesday, and I can tell you for sure that I am such a beginner. And the more times I sit with this medicine, the more I realize the truth of that. And I'm just, again, I'm so glad that you touched on the privilege of it, because I think that really needs to be talked about. And I'm certainly feeling that this week. And the nature of some of the stuff that's coming through, some of the stuff that I get are really not that profound. It's like working out stuff with my family or dynamics or little aspects of my personality that I can clean or fine tune. And then some of the things that I feel are so simple, like you said, yet so weightedly profound. And the one that's coming to mind right now, only because it's so fresh, is, and it's funny, my friend Eric Godsey, who you talked about his podcast, he was actually the episode I released on my podcast last week. He was sharing about his experience with ayahuasca here at Soltara too, and he talks about this mantra voice. And, this is not an experience across the board, but when he said the mantra voice, I knew exactly what he was talking about, because I also have the mantra voice sometimes, which is almost like this level of the medicine where I'm no longer breathing. Eric describes it as you're being breathed. So it's like all that's left in the background somewhere very far away is something breathing. And then with that, there's this track. This is how it is for me again. And it's this mantra voice. And the mantra voice for me on Tuesday was saying, hatred does not exist. It is only a resistance to love. So hate does not exist. It's only a resistance to love. And I had to repeat that in my head a lot. And the more that I said it, I started to understand. And I saw it starting from this micro level of like even hating ourselves or being hard on ourselves. It's actually just a resistance to loving ourselves. And then when you zoom out to the next sphere, it's my interactions with you or my lover or my friend that I'm in a fight with or people in my family. It's not hatred really. What it is it's love with nowhere to go. It's love that I'm warping with my funhouse mirrors. It's a lack of understanding of where to channel this love that really just is the truth of who we are. And then you zoom out even further and you can see conflicts between countries or groups of people or even with the environment on a global scale. It's just love that has gotten lost, that is confused, that wants to come home to itself. So that's what I'm working with right now.
That's so beautiful. And I think it resonates so much. Like there are a few people at the retreat, not to speak about their experiences, but just a theme that kept coming up that I saw. And I think you see this a lot in general, is that people that have a lot of like self-hatred towards themselves or their bodies or whatever that is, it's like the medicine always comes back to this self-love, right? And I just love that, right? It's like this hatred or this anger is just a resistance or fear to be able to love yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, what
absolutely.
is that like to project that out to somebody else? Like, I hate you, but what is it also like to love that person? How do you love what you hate?
I think it all comes down to loving ourselves. I mean, as elementary as that sounds, it's like you really can't love anything outside of yourself until you love yourself. And this is what this last ceremony was about for me, because I feel like I had gotten to a part in my development spiritually, or whatever you want to call it, where it was so easy for me to be the empathetic listener to others and really always sacrifice myself to be in service of others. And that felt okay. But the only thing that I couldn't master was kind of being nice to myself. And people would always say, "Oh, Hallie, you're so successful. Look at all that you do. Look at how much you've created. Wow, you're so wonderful. You must be so happy. Look at all that you have." And secretly inside, a lot of the time, I've been miserable, because there's a voice that tells me what to do, and she's mean. And so that was this thing. It was like I could clear everything else out until Tuesday, where honestly, this sounds a little wild, but the message that came was like, "We've been waiting for you to see this. Like, congratulations." Because I finally relaxed into self-love. I finally relaxed into allowing and not resisting even, this podcast or this platform or the privilege of that. I stopped saying, "I'm not worthy, choose someone else. Why am I doing this?" Because in doing that, I was, again, warping it. I was making it about me. And I think it's so easy for us to do that with our undeserving. And what we need to realize is I think that we all need to step outside of ourselves and realize that you are the perfect one to be you. We need every single you in the world to be the best version of you that you can be. And if you're negating yourself, you're not doing it. So the best thing you can do is to just shine and be your bright little self, because that vibration is going to ripple out and you're going to help and heal people just from being who you are. Again, it comes down to you don't need to try. You don't need to try to do anything. Make yourself different. Wrestle with it. Just allow you to be who you are. Remember that this life is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be joyful, and it can be if you just let it and you relax into being.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. It reminds me of two things. I was at a workshop and somebody said, like, don't dim your light to make others feel comfortable. And I think that's, it really talks about what you're saying. And also something else that I mentioned on the first podcast that we did that I've been really chewing on is I always think about like the people that I really look up to, like Dr. Stan Groff and like Carl Jung and like all these folks. It's like, what if these people never really showed up for themselves and did their work, right? They showed up and spread their medicine. And I think about that all the time, because I definitely have a lot of like wrestling back and forth of like what I want to be doing and this and that, and like, oh, I don't want to do this. And it's like, I always think about like, man, what if like Stan didn't show up to do his stuff, or like what if he was like too afraid to talk about like the things that really interest him in his work? Like, where would I be? And we all have medicine to share, right? And when we can like really relax into who we are and love ourselves and really embrace that to be able to share it with everybody, I mean, you have no idea who you're going to influence and who you're going to impact by being your authentic self. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I love that. And what I just remembered is like, I've changed what I've done in my life so many times. I've had so many odd jobs, and I've been a teacher. I was a celebrity nanny for a while. I founded a startup, and now I'm doing this podcast. And I used to have this guilt over switching, and I would lash myself with my own words saying like, can't you just stick with anything? Can't you just stay with something? And what I realize now, and what I hope other people will take from this, maybe someone who's stuck in something that thinks they have to stay, or that there's no other way out, or that they don't deserve to create something new, that it's too big of a risk. I would say, trust that it's just because you're growing. You don't need to feel guilty that you can't stay with something, because it's not about you can't. It's about sometimes we just grow, and it's okay to leave things behind. Everything in this life is born and then dies. And even within one life, we can have many births and deaths. So just to allow it and to embrace it. And I would say if you're not happy, of course we're not going to be happy all the time, but if you're not waking up with at least a little bit of that sense of magic, or that sense of excitement, that sense of joy, just take a step back and consider, is there some aspect of this I'm creating for myself, or how am I disallowing self-love? And that would be my 2 cents.
That's a wonderful place to end this on. And just to kind of comment too, really briefly, it's like I think this is a struggle with like integration, is sometimes we're shown like maybe different paths or different parts of ourselves that we've been neglecting. And there's a fear or resistance to maybe step into new form. And because of like what will happen if I let go of what I've either created, what I have, but you also don't know how you could serve other people in this new form, or how you could serve yourself in this new form, and what would it be like to step into some sort of new potential. And I struggle with that too, of like resisting change at times, because I'm like afraid to let go of like, oh, like I've created this thing or that. And it's like, well, I have no idea what that new form could do. Right. And I think that's a real challenge with trying to integrate psychedelic experiences, where you just get like this huge download of like, whoa, like maybe I get a glimpse of something new in my life, but there's like that resistance to take the leap of faith, and also of letting go of something. And so, yeah, I think I always come back to that Terrence McKenna quote. It's like, I forget how it goes, but essentially it's like falling into the abyss and realizing that it's a feather bed. So how can you trust that wherever life is taking you, and to just really surrender into it? And sometimes that includes letting go of things to create new form.
Beautiful. I love it.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Hallie, for this interview. And thank you for everybody, or anybody that is still with us listening. Thanks for sticking to the end. I know this is a little bit of a longer one, but it's also been kind of like a processing episode to really kind of go through some of the stuff that came up through my week at Soltara. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for you, Hallie, for sharing this experience with me and being there on the last few days and yeah, just being part of the journey. So I really appreciate you taking the time for this interview and kind of helping to interview me on this one.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And again, I'm so grateful that you asked. And I also just wanted to say, to circle back around to the conversation about access and the price of these things. And again, encouraging people to really do their research on where is right for them. But I did just want to offer that if after this episode you want to do a little bit more digging and there is anybody who wants to look into coming here to Soltara specifically, I have a special link and I also have a coupon code if your listeners want access to that. If there's people that, were already kind of feeling that call, but maybe it felt like a bit of a financial stretch, if that's all right with you, I'd love to give that out to your listeners. Cool. So, and I can also send it to you so we can put it in the show notes and people can follow that directly. But the link is very simply, you just open up your browser. You can type in bit.ly/Soltara. So it's bit.ly/SOLTARA. And if you use the code ThoughtRoom, you can get $200 off your ayahuasca retreat here at Soltara. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. That is amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And lastly, where can people find you on the web if people want to follow you?
Yeah. So I'm most active on Instagram, and you can find the podcast at Thought Room Podcast. And if people want to follow my personal account, that is at Hallie, HALLIE_Rosebud. So that's the best way. And then, of course, we have www.thoughtroompodcast.com, which has all of our episodes and show notes. And we're creating a store right now. And so that's also rich with content. And we're going to start sending out a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for there as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Hallie. Thanks for joining us. And it's been a real pleasure. I hope to have you on again real soon. So thank you so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Hallie Rose and myself. Again, yeah, that was my experience down there was pretty special, very beautiful. And I just have so much gratitude and love and thanks for the folks down at Soltara for facilitating this, inviting me down there, and for creating such a really safe container for us to do some exploring. Us meaning the participants and anybody who goes down there. Again, if you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to email us if you have any comments, questions, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. And we will catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today. Hope you enjoy your week, and we'll chat next time.